encourage people to take a look at that book. Like everything, take what works, leave the rest. But there's some very good principles that come out of that. So applying that now into manufacturing, what we want to do is have the best people. We want to have following a disciplined process, the right technology, developing robust solutions that are finally going to lead to long-term impact to the overall business. And if you think about those types of things from just take a step back of what it is that you're doing, those are the exact same types of behaviors.
And welcome to Unplugged, an IoT podcast, where we delve into the fascinating world of industrial Internet of Things and automation. I'm your host, Phil Saboa.
Hi, Phil, and I'm Ed Fuentes. Today, we have a very special guest with us, actually, David Schultz. He's the principal consultant at Spruik Technologies.
Yeah, Dave has an extensive background in consulting, engineering, project management, and digital transformation. He's passionate about leveraging current and emerging technologies to overcome challenges in manufacturing. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry for interrupting there. I didn't realize I was going to get this grand welcome. So thank you for that. I'm feeling right at home. So, um, yeah, no, it's great to be here. I'm a big believer in manufacturing and technology, and it's just so exciting with all the stuff that's finally converging together where there's this great host of technology that's been used for years, and now we're finally able to get it and applied down to the manufacturing level. So
Oh, that's great,
lots of good
David.
stuff.
We're quite excited actually to have you here. I know it's probably an early start for you, and I thank you for that. And I imagine both Phil and I have seen you obviously through the socials on IoT and in your especially your vocalization around unified namespace, your ISA 95 and digital transformation. It's a great journey, but what better way to hear the David Schultz story than from David Schultz? So tell us your story and how you got into the industry, David.
Yeah, one of the questions that I get
Mm.
asked is, how did you do this? And I'm going to date myself a little bit, but when I got into process control through an ad in the newspaper. So for people who are unfamiliar with the way things used to work back, before
Yeah.
we had dial-up internet, is that when you were looking for work, you had to go to the classified ads in this thing called the newspaper, and it was this thing that came to your door every morning, and you'd thumb through it. And Sunday was the big day; you always wanted to get it because that's when most of the job classifieds were there, and you would go through and look for the things that were of interest to you. And remember, you had to pay for character. It wasn't like digital media where it was free. But so there was an ad that was something around it. It was a sales position doing some process automation, and I had been working as a product engineer at a culvert manufacturer, and just really wasn't feeling it. So thought they're looking for somebody with a degree in engineering. Somebody wants to go into sales. So I raised my hand, and there it was. So, journeying through the careers are really sort of three different parts to it. The first part was spent at the, what we know as that ISA level one or ISA 95 level one, which is it's all your devices. So it's your instrumentation, it's your control valves, it's your pumps. It's that type of equipment that's used for control. And of course, we had some, there's a lot of other technology, filtration, separation, air dryers, but a lot of the work was around instrumentation. So worked for several companies, introduced me a lot of different market verticals, but really the first part of that career was around that instrumentation, the measurement and controls, that type of thing. When I started looking at what was happening within the process automation, is that a lot of the larger projects started to have more and more influence as you got higher up that proverbial technology stack. So when you start getting into SCADA and MES, that's where the large DCS vendors were. They had a lot more. If you take a look at the overall automation footprint of a process automation company, if 100 equals the total of the automation, really only about 2% of that was going to be around your instrumentation. The rest of it was all control. So, naturally, just by spend, you'd have that. So next phase of the career was really getting into more of that SCADA, into that the manufacturing execution of how it is we're going to go about doing things. So worked for several companies that did a lot of the the HMI, the SCADA, some manufacturing execution system, and had a pretty good go of it there. But the challenge that I was having is that my background is I'm a degree engineer. And, I was that kid that grew up running the film projector in grade school. All my
Take
toys
them
when I got
apart.
as a kid, I
Yes.
had to take them apart and see, can
Yes.
I make these things better? Yeah, it's they say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. To me, if it ain't broke, I
If
haven't
it ain't
messed with
broke,
it
make it
enough.
better, you
So,
know?
and make it better. Exactly. It's
Yes,
clearly
right.
not optimized for what it could be doing. So, and that's how I was wired. But what I was running into is that, no, you're in a sales business development role. We need you focusing commercially. And it was a miss because, to the credit of some of the previous companies, a lot of time was spent around the technology and the technical aspects of how do we do control? Why are these things so important for when we're doing measurement and controlling of pumps and all those types of things? So, finally in that last iteration of it, it's like, you know what? And I can't say that I chose it. It more chose me, but found myself in a position 2019. That's, I'm going to go out and I'm going to become a
Oh,
systems integrator and I'm going to deliver these systems.
hmm.
And I will tell just a little bit of advice for anybody that's thinking of doing the same. Do not start your own company right before a global pandemic. That is not a good idea. Wait for the pandemic to settle and then go start the business.
Sound
So there's
advice.
your pro tip for the day. So yeah, so that's where I am now. That's the background. Like I said, it started out sales biz dev. Always been very technical, and learned. The upside of being in COVID is that I had a lot of time on my hands to sharpen my technical saw, and am very familiar with a lot of products, a lot of solutions, and I was always familiar with manufacturing. But how do I then take these solutions and deploy and solve problems for manufacturers? And now with all that experience that I've had in multiple market verticals, a lot of it starts to coalesce around. There's just some great learnings across industries that if you're only in one industry, all you ever see is that how that one industry does it versus getting a broad array of the entire technology stack there. So that's a little bit about my background. But for people that are younger, they're going to say, "What's this newspaper and the job at classifieds?" I'm
I
gonna
have
have
a
to
big
look
memory
that
of
up.
that too, David. I must admit. I remember getting those classifieds. It was a massive section of what we was called the age here in those days, and yeah, looking at all the jobs were there. Everything was
Mm-hmm.
there. You're right. How things have changed in what? Ugh, I don't want to think about how many years. 25 years.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
had a physical resume and you wrote a cover letter and you mailed it off, and maybe at some
yeah.
point you'd hear back. You have no
It's a
idea if
letter
they got it
or
or anything.
email.
It's the struggle was
Brilliant.
real, Ed.
Absolutely. I guess from that technical background, I guess you've learned, I guess, some of the best practices, some of the, you know, ways to do things in the industry. I guess you've now leaned towards this, structure and an ISA 95 standard type approach. I guess maybe you
Hmm.
can explain what that ISA 95 standard looks like and its significance for optimizing manufacturing processes.
Yeah, so ISA 95, I mean, it literally is a podcast in and of itself and probably several. So I'll try to break it down and digest it for you. So the ISA 95 standard is currently in 8 parts. There's soon to be a ninth part that is coming out. And the entire reason why the standard was created was to help your business systems interact with your manufacturing systems. So it's truly an exercise in how do we exchange data from what is known as our level 4. So that's your ERP, that's your SAPs, your Oracle, your Microsoft Dynamics of the world, your enterprise resource planning. And how do we get the information that's there down into the shop floor for that manufacturing execution, that manufacturing operations management? So, what ISA 95 standard, what it first sought to do was how do we then standardize on the data models that we want to exchange the information back and forth? And it kind of worked in fits and starts because I think one of the challenges that ISA 95 has had is that at the time, a lot of those manufacturing execution systems, which occur at now what we call the level 3 within the ISA 95 standard, they were already built. Their backends were there. They were mature products. The same with ERP. So now we're trying to take this new standard of data modeling and try to get it to work with the technology that's there. And I think that's always been one of the challenges. But so that's what the envisioning of the ISA 95 standard is. Now, many people are familiar with Part 2 of the standard, which is really where you're doing your level 4 to level 3 integration. But there's also a part 3 that talks about what's known as your activity models. Activity models are where we're going to It's sort of we're going to define what the work is. So there's a portion of that of this is what's in scope, or the thing how you go about. So think about your work instructions. That's one of the activity models. Now we're going to plan and dispatch that work. So that's the act of actually saying, okay, here, now go do this work, take this work instruction and apply it. And then there's the actual process of where we're doing that work, and we're taking a look at what's happening, what's going on there. We're taking measurements of here's the plan. And then finally, we're looking at what are the actuals. So, here's how we should go about doing the work, go forth and do the work. Okay, now we're doing the work. And then how did we actually do in performing that? So part 3 really gets into the activity models. And of course, part 4 is really where you start getting into the weeds a little bit, because it's really a level 3 to level 3 information exchange. So what do I mean by that? And this is a demo that we're currently working on right now, that say I'm a juice factory and I need to bottle up, so many bottles of juice, that I have a client who, a customer who now wants to receive a certain amount of that. From the ERP's view of the world, of course, I need to receive some material. So, that's going to be handled down with the execution system. But I first need to make the juice. And all the ERP is really interested in is, did I consume raw materials and did I produce some WIP? So there's going to be an information exchange there. However, in the actual manufacturing process, you're going to have other activities that are going to only occur at level 3. We still need to exchange that data between other level 3 systems, but it could be I'm going to get the ingredients ready to go. I'm going to pick the order, or I'm going to kit the order. In this case, I need to get the flavor, the sugar, the color, or the sweetener. There's those types of things. So there's other activities that occur that are outside of the purview. Since I'm not exchanging level 3 to level 4, I still need to account for that work and do work performance around it. So, that's really where that part 4 of the standard comes in. The other parts really get into how we're exchanging data, whether we use PubSub, or we want to use a pull response. It's how we actually model some of the data transition, and some of the if you're familiar with the MQTT standard, maybe some of the verbs that get used, or how we want to structure that data back and forth. So there's a lot there, but I would just say from the ISA 95 standard, we look at it as it's an ontology to describe your business. And I don't know how much into the weeds you want me to go in terms of what's in the standard, but simply put, there's 4 resource models. There's your material, there's your equipment, there's your assets, there's your personnel. We then create the templates, if you will, of what's the smallest unit of work. So in this case, it could be receive material. And then we use that same small unit of work to create the overall work that we're going to perform. And you'll see that what's known as a process segment manifest itself into, I'm going to receive sugar at a particular work center type of thing. So we get specific. I'm going to exchange data, and then finally I'm going to get into more of just some of the smaller units of work that's only going to exchange within that level 3. So again, we look at it as an ontology for describing a manufacturing operations, more than just a way to transmit data in a semantic data model. So, hopefully that cleared it up.
Look, you're right, David. I like to just keep hitting play, and just keep talking about it, because it definitely is a standard we hear quite a lot spoken. And ISO 95 being one that was, now correct me if I'm wrong here, 95 means that it was commenced in 1995 as a standard.
Interestingly enough, it just happened to correlate with that, but really it's the 95th standard that's been created by ISA. So ISA 88, you think, well, that was around the late 80s, so 88, 90, but in reality, it has nothing to do with it. It just happens to line up because there were some really great standards that came out. Because now we're into like 112.
No, you're right. I was good because it's been around for quite a while as a standard, and both Phil and I, we're quite passionate around the whole process of digital transformation. And when we hear talk about digital transformation, ISO 95 comes up a lot in conversation, as like you mentioned, the ontology of how you create process flow, workflows, asset hierarchy, asset modeling. So there's a bit of a synergy between what 95 does and the process of digital transformation. Would that be fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so real fast, the standard came out a long time ago, but it continues to evolve. So the latest versions of Part 2 is from 2018. I believe there's a new version coming out. Part 1 was 2010. You have Part 9 that's coming out later this year. So what the original standard was and what it is now, they're not the same thing. So it's not like it's done, it's dusted, it was perfect, and no, it's not like Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, and here's the ISA
In
95 standard
stone.
and all of
Yeah.
its parts, and
Yeah.
go forth and prosper. It,
Right.
it, it continues to evolve. So I want to make sure that people are, the listeners are aware that it's not something that's static, it's dynamic. The committee is still very active, and we still, even our company, we make recommendations and those get incorporated into the standard, because there's just, one of the challenges early on was with some of the technology that's there. Well, now with newer technology, whether it's a graph database or the ability to do a lot more orchestration around
Mm.
how we get messages back and forth, there's some newer technology that just lends itself very well for what it is we're trying to do. So it lends itself well, because at the end of the day, you mentioned earlier, this
Mm.
unified namespace concept. Well,
Mm.
there's semantic data models. Well, you take a look at ISA 95. It's a
Yeah.
bunch of semantic data models. We can describe things based on, here's the standard for what this object is called. Here's where it fits. Here's how it relates to all the other data that exists within the standard. And it can become very powerful
And
if
in your
applied
role as
correctly.
consultant, does that, obviously the ISO 95, it sounds like it plays a significant or important role as you work with companies, I suppose through that transformation process or the digital transformation process, and how the 95 standards give foundation and give guidance that it's sort of correct, like it does. A
Mhm.
standard should give you some ideas and consistent standards around transformation process. So what are some effective strategies that you've seen when you've done or applied digital transformation to businesses?
Yeah, so every consulting project that I'm involved in includes what I call the
Okay. Yep.
ISA 95 primer. And the ISA 95, keep in mind, it's not something you have to use all of the standard. It's like many things, you take what works and you leave the rest. Every use case is going to have its unique set of challenges. The thinking is, the ISA 95 gives you a way to think about things, and if you need to model certain things, it becomes a really good standard. And it's abstract enough, and I think this is where it can become a challenge, that it really applies for a lot of different use cases. And it's hard to get your head wrapped around it sometime. But once you understand it, and there's an understanding of how we want to work with the data, then it becomes very powerful, and it's somewhat of the aha moment. But it's mostly just think about how we want to get data exchanged, how we want to model things so we know what things are. Um, yeah, so in just getting to the strategies in general, if we want to move off the ISA 95 topic, it's, I'm a big believer in just, there's some business principles that apply, whether it's digital transformation or manufacturing or anything. And so, I encourage people to just continually read books, learn new information, concepts, and ideas. It's certainly something you be an adult learner, continue to evolve your skill set and the things that you can do. But there's some fundamentals out there. And the strategies that work for digital transformation, or me, go back to, and I reference Good to Great, Jim Collins, all the time: discipline people, discipline thought, discipline action. And I encourage people to take a look at that book. Like everything,
Mhm.
take what works, leave the rest. But there's some very good principles that come out of that. So applying that now into manufacturing, what we want to do is have the best people. We want to have following a disciplined process, the right technology, developing robust solutions that are finally going to lead to long-term impact to the overall business. And if you think about those types of things, from just take a step back of what it is that you're doing, those are the exact same types of behaviors that you need to do. Digital transformation, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit, later on in the podcast. It's really about change management. The technology is great. The technology is there. We're starting to apply some of the ways that you go about, and people on the IT side of the world have done things for years. We're seeing that. But fundamentally, we've got to rethink how we are going about solving problems and utilizing that technology. So, certainly that's what I'd recommend for some of those strategies that are out there.
Absolutely. I mean, when we're seeing digital transformation and we're talking with our customers here in Australia, and they're starting to explore, I guess, how they're modeling their data, how they're trying to understand how all those different layers are starting to interact with each other, how they transition between each layers, what security models they might need, what transformation of that
Mhm.
data, because it's coming from, layer 1, it's being pushed up to layer 2, and then it's transformed, and then up to layer 3. Taking those different
Mhm.
data sets and moving forward can be quite challenging in that sense, and you don't know what you need to know as well.
Absolutely. So, that defined process is there's a way. The first thing you need to do is understand of what is our business? What is it the thing that we do? And what I'll talk about in consulting, what's known as that order to cash of we now have an order. So, I referenced this juice. Somebody now needs so many bottles of a red juice. How do I actually go through the process of manufacturing that? Or what are all the steps and hurdles and who touches something when we're actually, if you were to physically walk walk that sales order all the way through the process, what would it look like? What would it touch? Who would touch it? What are the types of activities that occur at each one of those phases all the way through? And we talk about how manufacturers all follow a very similar process. This is something we're all familiar with out of 4.0 solutions. Is you sell stuff, you plan stuff, you execute work, you control the line, control the process. You move stuff to inventory, you build stuff, you buy stuff, and you continue the overall loop all over and over again. The same type of thing. So this is part of that, understanding how all that business works. The next thing you need to understand is what is all the technology that's associated with it. This is all that we refer to the smart things that are out there. So what are all the systems that it's outlining? What's our ERP? What do we have for an MES? What do we have for SCADA? What do we use for our PLCs and all our control? And understand what's there. And then once you start from that, then you want to start getting everything connected. And so the strategy is very much what we're trying to do is get all of these islands of automation or all these disparate systems at least connected into a common ecosystem. And as we say, if you're still using a lot of manual data entry and you don't have systems that are integrated, the strategy is start getting those things integrated. If you have stranded intelligence, get it unstranded, get it connected. And then finally, we talk a little bit more about, again, unified namespace. This is where we start implementing all of these data models so that as we're connecting all this data, we can exchange that data in a common, as we call it, the ontology of how we're going to utilize that information. So I'm not just going to look at a bunch of disparate data. I'm going to look at a model of data. Assets are the easiest thing for people to understand. I'm famous for my pump, my motor, my compressor. That's exactly how I'm going to model things. I don't have 10 different tags that are related to the compressor. I have a compressor which happens to have this information, and here's how it gets exchanged. um, and then once you do that, then you just continue to and I would focus on very good use cases. So when you first get going in your digital transformation, define a use case. What's a problem that you are trying to solve? Make sure you have it very well defined so everybody can define it. They can they can taste it, they can touch it, they can smell it, they can see it. All of the sensors are there. We know about exactly what it is we're trying to do. Now what do we need to do? Where's the data we need to solve this problem? Get it modeled, and then get other systems consuming that data, and just continue to move through that process. So digital transformation isn't a project. It isn't that there's no other destination. It's an iterative process where you're going to continue to do this over and over and over again, because as you evolve and create more intelligence, you're going to realize, man, look at all these things we can do with all this data. And is it possible to, I get that question a lot. Is it possible? And generally, yeah, it is. And it's economically viable to do it too.
Absolutely. It's so funny how they, these iterative processes, you know, I talk with customers sometimes, and they're focused on the end goal instead of the journey of digital transformation. Taking those small wins, successes, and building momentum on those to actually improve the systems and identify challenges within their organization, and see that as a part of the process of digital transformation, rather than just ticking a box to say we're almost there along the way as well. So it's really interesting how we see this progressing, especially as
Mm-hmm.
people grow and get used to some of the terminology that's being used in the industry as well. It's pretty exciting stuff.
I imagine, David, the way you
Yeah,
explain it, it just sounds you know, for us, it's like absolutely this is how it works. And I imagine when you go to see your customers, and they'll go, absolutely, we're in. No, 100%. They always say yes, don't they?
Mhm.
As you present the digital transformation story and the journey.
Um,
Mm.
no,
No.
no,
Can
they
you help
don't.
us there? Like,
Yeah, no, it can be a challenge. I think you're going to have, there's going to be pockets of people that are, the champion. So, my background is, as I mentioned, is more sales, business development, and the question that always gets asked of, what's the title or what's the persona of the person where you're going to be most successful. And the reality is, it's all over the map. It just depends. Somewhere within the organization, there's a person that knows we can do things better. Like, this is crazy the way we're doing things. Think of the new people coming out of college and how they go about solving problems. And the classic example, and I'm going to date myself again. When I worked on cars as a kid, we had the Chilton's manual. And you went to the Chilton's manual, and it actually walked through how you would actually do some kind of and perform some kind of work on your automobile. I wouldn't do that anymore. I'd go to YouTube. Somebody has there's really a lot of great YouTube people out there. I can fix anything in the world now. There's a YouTube video. Somebody shows me how to work on my specific model of my washing machine on how to replace something. And there's a video that's associated with it. It's the same type of thing. So when you apply that type of thinking into a manufacturing environment and people look, this is crazy, why are we doing it this way? Then that's where you start getting that change. And I've worked with people that are in automation and control. Some people they're a category owner for a manufacturer. Sometimes you will have some leadership, and there's always with each role that's out there, there's always challenges, because if you're too high up, it's what's the people in the ivory tower want us to do the day, and versus if you're too low within the food chain, as it were. If you think about the hierarchy of how we organize ourselves, it's, is there enough influence? Is there going to be enough buy-in? Are we going to be able to be successful with that? So unfortunately, no, they don't always say no, but it's work with that champion and help that champion become successful within that organization. And that's going to be a lot of that role of guide that person, arm them with the tools they need to be successful. Um, but if nothing else, go off and do something and be successful, because once you are, you guys know that a lot of my background is in asset performance management. There's a book, and I'm going to murder the title, so I apologize. It's called Along the Lines of Don't Fix It, Eliminate It. It's all around defect elimination. Start small, get some little wins, and just continue to cascade them. It's the exact same type of thing that you want to do within digital transformation, which is why digital transformation, asset performance management comes together so nicely, because a lot of the same things apply. Just make sure that we're all looking around what everybody else is doing as well to get it done in concert.
Awesome. We have a bit of a segment on our IoT podcast, and it's called The Industrial Anecdote. And it's something that we just kind of explore into your background, a little bit of a deep dive into, okay, so you've seen a few sites, you've seen a few projects, and just getting a bit of an understanding of, what did you see done well? What did you see maybe didn't go so well in your past as well? And just get a bit of an insight into some of the cool things that you may have seen.
Yeah. So, one of the biggest challenges that you run into is that when you want to start, we're talking about these data models, it's always getting connected to devices. And from an architectural standpoint, that's always going to be, but I have all this data, but I have no way of getting it out. And that could be on a piece of equipment. It could be on that, that sits in some database that we don't have access to, and that type of thing. But I need to be able to get a measurement, and I need to be able to do something with it. I would say the most common thing I run into is that when we start doing digital transformation, one of the very first projects that gets worked on is some kind of downtime tracking or downtime monitoring. It's almost we have outages, we don't know why. We have lost production, and we can't figure it out. Now, there's probably some sort of clipboard, or there's a report that somebody does at the end of a shift on, yeah, I was down this many minutes, and here's why I was down. The reality is, our fidelity to that is it's horrible, because at the end of the shift, the operator wants to get the paperwork done, wants to get out, wants to go home, spend time with the family, do whatever is there. So I'm just going to fill out the form. I've checked my box, and I'm going to send it in. Not trying to throw stones at anybody. It's just human nature. don't tell my boss this, but I do the same thing sometimes. But in reality, that's what we're looking at. So downtime tracking becomes, we're just losing production. Can we at least start keeping track of that? So it's really easy to understand, is the line running, is the line not running? But now we want to start applying some different reasons for why we were down. And maybe there's several reasons that go into that. And what does that look like? So I would say anecdotally, it's when we get into the cases where you want to try to automate as much of this as possible. We're not always going to have some nice little clean PLC digit that's going to tell us exactly why the equipment's down. And we have to start inferring the reasons down. We have to infer that, oh, the line is up in production, or no, the line is down. So I would say just a lot of the, some early wins is that oftentimes in the data sets, I have the raw data, but what are the other ways that I can infer that certain conditions are occurring to where I can automate it and get that process done? So from an anecdotal standpoint, I would, this is the challenge is, share some of the ways that you've gone about doing certain things. What were some of the measurements that were out there? Is, I have a downtime code that can mean the same thing for three different things. Well, there's a scheduled work order here. So if I'm not running, that's probably a downtime. So we're going to go ahead and assign a downtime to that type of thing. Or, on a plastic extrusion company, sometimes you need to have a certain piece of equipment. It's called a winder that's actually winding. Well, once now it's actually in winding, you can see that it's moving. Now you're in production, so you can move all the states over there. So I would say, for anecdotally speaking, it's sometimes we have to get pretty darn creative of how we go about getting some of these use cases assigned. Um, so yeah, that's been a, I would say those are the challenges, and some of the I guess I overcame this. We figured it out. We figured, determined a way to present the data so we could capture it correctly. And of course, there's always going to be those wins as well. And, I'll come back to the same theme. It's a lot of change management. Sometimes you just have some political decisions that are made, and you need to you're going to be surrounded by those, but, they can be overcome. It's just a matter of just staying at it, and just be smart.
That was good. It's amazing that we hear the concepts about different challenges and the anecdotes that you mentioned that business suffers, and and even in your own journey, David, you've gone, looking at books in the past, fixing cars, and looking at YouTube now. We talked about ISA 95 and digital transformation, and I suppose it brings us into what we call Industry 4.0. So that's where, like, from perspective, let's talk about Industry 4.0. Maybe we'll get your insight into that. And how do you see it impacting manufacturing today, the future of manufacturing, and how does especially around your space, around the automation that you've been involved with, those architectures, how do they play into this transformation, into this Industry 4 discussion and narrative? How do you see it?
Yeah, so I'm going to go back a little bit where you talked about some strategies that are very helpful. The first thing I would really do is, or one of the first activities is, let's make sure we're
Mm,
defining terms and using them correctly. So you mentioned the word Industry 4.0. And the way that I present Industry 4.0 is that it's the moment in time. It's the current. We had Industry 3.0, we had Industry 2.0. They were marked by certain activities or certain things that we did. Well, Industry 4.0 is all around, here's how we're going to be doing those manufacturing systems. So it's just the current era of manufacturing, much like the Bronze Age or the Stone Age or the Iron Age. We now have the same type of thing. It's in manufacturing. It's now, we're in the age, if you will, of Industry 4.0. We're integrating business systems to our manufacturing systems, and we're going to collect all of this data, and we're going to analyze that data. So the architectures that are going to be successful are around the idea that we're connecting all these systems together. We're going to use our business systems in concert with our manufacturing systems and start getting some meaningful analysis of that. So within Industry 4.0, the way we architect it's going to be creating these what's known as the IIoT ecosystem. So at home, I have my IoT ecosystem. I have my smart appliance. My vacuum cleaner, my oven, my garage door, my thermostat, my Christmas lights. I have a lot of different pieces that I bring together. We want to apply that same type of thinking to all of our manufacturing systems. So earlier when I was describing of like, what does this journey look like, or the digital transformation journey, it's exactly the same type of thing. We're going to take all these disparate systems and we're going to get them connected together. So with that, it's, and we're going to get a little bit into these event-driven architectures, and there's a whole bunch of information around what do you mean by an event-driven architecture. But the idea is that instead of having these bespoke point-to-point systems, what we want to do is create these architectures where when an event occurs, and what I mean by an event is there's something that's happened that is of interest, there's some new data that's now being made available. I want to present that to other systems to be consumed. I don't want to have to integrate those manually. I want to be able to connect those through a common technology platform, so that when I'm exchanging my data, and this comes full circle to the ISA 95, is here's my intelligence. I've modeled this intelligence, and all the other systems, what's known as that data contract, can now consume that data and know exactly what that information is. So when it comes to actually architecting the systems, we'll bring up the unified namespace. The idea is that we're going to connect our intelligence to technology, not systems and solutions. We're going to use a common technology method of exchange. Oftentimes that can be MQTT. NATS works, AM or DMP3, AMP or DNP3, AMQP. There's a lot of these event-driven architecture technologies that are out there, but we want to start thinking in terms of exchanging that data through that technology, rather than just the way we used to do things of integrating them point to point. As I call the DEM bones model of, the leg bone's connected to the thigh bone, it's connected to the hip bone. Bring it all into a common
Yeah.
technology in an event-driven
Yeah, just
architecture.
making the data available to the whole business, will create these activity driven decision making processes, really fueled by data, because just having access to the data can stimulate those processes, being able to identify the cause and effect of that data stream. An event happens at the edge, we publish it up into a common architecture, and then we consume it to be able to make those decisions, which is really the holy grail, I guess, when it comes to business architectures.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental premise of the UNS is that the current state of the business. So the most recent intelligence that comes from every system, we're going to know exactly what it is in terms of, the analogy that I make is in, the movie Spaceballs. There is a scene where they're actually watching Spaceballs, the movie, in the movie. And they get it to the point of, what you're seeing now is happening now. And, he's moving his hand up and down. And it's like, well, what happened to then? You just missed it. When? Just now. I mean, it's just there's a whole little series of spoofs back and forth. But I envision the UNS as that's exactly what that is what you're seeing now is what's happening now, and it's representing that current state. So all of the smart things, whether it's PLCs or your SCADA or your MES or even your ERP, the last sales order that it received, that information is available. You can see exactly what is the most current state that exists there within the UNS. And then, of course, all the other nodes within that ecosystem can consume that data and can process that data based on the data that is of interest to me, and how it is that I'm now going to convert that into intelligence and maybe publish something back, so that there's additional intelligence that's
Yeah,
created
it's
there.
good that you
But
clarified that.
and that's the power of
Yeah.
how we're using it.
No, yeah,
I'm
it's
sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
absolutely good that you clarified that, because common misconception about the UNS is, it has historian type functionality, which is not really it's not the case, right? It's the real time event, as you mentioned, the current state of the business, which then a consumer could be a historian type functionality as well. So
Mhm. Yeah, or some kind of data warehouse that we're now starting to do some. It could be a Kafka stream coming up. There's a lot of ways to process that data, and it just depends on what is my role within this overall organization for doing things. It could be a process historian that's really just doing its role of process data, but other systems are going to be interested in what's happening here. I'm going to be comparing the work order, what's running on the line, to maybe some other asset, health metrics. If I have rotating equipment, there's some vibration. I'm going to be looking at and bringing those things together and analyzing it. Where the process historian, I'm just interested in TVQ, my time, the value, and the quality. Other systems are going to use that data differently, and they'll present their findings back within the UNS.
Absolutely. So I guess, David, I guess going back to your asset performance management days, and
Mhm.
I guess how important is asset performance management in manufacturing, and how can companies utilize data driven, informed decision making to drive information?
Yeah, it's fantastic question, and I think this goes back in a little bit of the history of how I landed where I am. So, back around 2008, 2009 is when I was first introduced to the concept of reliability and availability of assets. And it was just on the backside of the financial crisis, the housing and all the derivatives and all the wonkiness that was going on in the financial markets at the time. And it became very clear that for 60 years of manufacturing, 80 years of manufacturing in the US, we were pretty isolated in the sense that most of the time what we produced, we could consume. And at that point, became very clear that, you know what, we're in a global economy now, and we're at a major disadvantage when it comes to our environmental costs, to our energy costs, to our labor costs, in some ways to our raw material costs. You take a look at how much raw material we import, it now becomes, what is a strategy that we as American manufacturers can use to be successful? And that's when reliability and availability of equipment became the sort of the aha moment for me of everything that I do is now going to speak to, how do we make your process more reliable? Regardless of whatever the solution or the equipment that I'm providing, how does this address the overall reliability? Because if I can take those raw materials with my higher cost, but I have a better utilization of my equipment, a lower cost to maintain that equipment, that's a huge economic advantage. Now, keep in mind, it's not easy to do this, and many companies have tried, and it comes back to that whole defect elimination we were talking about. It's a journey. It's at least a 2 to 3 year process from becoming a reliability centered organization of, we're not going to do things the way we used to do it. We're going to do things a new way. We're going to apply the proper reliability strategy to the risk of that associated with that asset, and we're going to continue to improve and improve and improve. So really around like that, like I said, 2008, 2009, in that era, that's when that reliability became very near and dear, because if we don't have manufacturing, we don't have a middle class. If we don't have a middle class, we're in trouble. And while I focus here on the US, that same thing applies to any world area, where you are, whether you're Aussie or you're British, or any other country, the same types of things apply. It worked very well once you got into the whole digital transformation, because when you take a look at asset management, we get into there's various strategies you can employ. Condition-based management or predictive-based maintenance is another one of those. It's really an exercise in, we're collecting a lot of data. We're looking at, how does this data correlate with each other? So think of these Monte Carlo analyses, or we're going to do some regression analyses, and we're going to start predicting the behavior of an asset based on, most of the time when this equipment is operating and it's operating well, this is how this data relates to each other. But if you see something that's unusual, then you can provide an indication of, hey, something's going on here, come take a look. You sort of raise your hand of, I may have a problem here. And it allows you to go in and determine, yeah, there is a problem, or you know what, that's actually normal, go ahead and learn this, but note it in the learning of this is how it works. And that's a lot of that asset performance management. Now you apply that in about the same time where industry 4.0 is really starting to take off. A lot of these reliability or companies that were making this predictive maintenance equipment, part of this asset performance, we're also starting to capture some of your process information. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, in reliability, that you're interested in your oil analysis, your vibration, your ultrasonic, and your IR, your thermals. So what's the temperature of the equipment? And those are the four most common pieces of data that you would capture on a fairly regular basis. Now we're going to start taking a look at some of the process data of, going back to that compressor or that pump or some piece of rotating equipment, is, what is the product that's moving through this? What is its flow rate? What is its pressures? What are its temperatures? So more process type information. So we're now, not only are we capturing those four pieces of the reliability data, as I call it, we're bringing that data together. We're now taking all this process data, we're starting to marry them over, and it gets us better and better at making these actual predictive, the models of it. And the latest iteration of this now, of course, is going to be your prescriptive maintenance, where it's going to say, hey, not only do I have a problem, but you're going to have a failure in some period of time. And then you can start making decisions based on that. But, to me, it's, if you're doing digital transformation, reliability is a great place to start, because it takes a lot of work, but it's a very assured strategy of how do we compete in a global marketplace. And as a manufacturer, your manufacturing process, that is your economic engine, and you need your manufacturing process to hum. And asset management and optimizing your equipment, those are really going to be the, you mentioned earlier, the holy grail. That's exactly what we're going for here. Is, if I can do this better than the other juice factory across town, I'm in good
It's a
shape.
very tangible value proposition. The asset performance management. I like you, Dave. I did a few stints in different roles, and I did do a stint in condition based monitoring. And I remember it would have been late '90s actually, where all we were doing was taking a measurement of the vibration it is now and what's it next, and trending it over time. And that was one variable. Then you added, or you said, you
Mm-hmm.
other four variables that were so focused on the asset, like you mentioned, and through, I suppose, Industry 4 and digital transformation and the availability of adding other data, context to that asset, process
Mm-hmm.
data, really makes it tangible as a value proposition to get
Mm-hmm.
information around that asset, not just on its own, but how that affects the other assets upstream and downstream of a pump or a compressor, because it all becomes part of the whole manufacturing line. And it does add to that point you mentioned before about total time to value, the challenges that manufacturers have. One juice company with the other juice company, their asset is their lines and the people that work with them and the data they have, the visibility they've got. So that whole journey of digital transformation does give them, right, that ability to see and predict and prescribe prescriptive analytics, as you mentioned before. But I'm sure there's challenges, though, isn't there? There's
Mm-hmm.
challenges that they are having still in their journey in digital transformation. How can they overcome them? What are the challenges you're seeing that they're facing, even though this is great? But there's challenges. What are the challenges you're seeing? What are the common challenges you see? And how do they overcome them?
So there's a couple of challenges that come to mind here, and one, of course, is the technical challenge, and I referenced this a little bit earlier. It's just sometimes trying to get data out of the system, out of the source of the intelligence that's there. Sometimes it's just being able to connect to a PLC. So right now I'm working with a client. We're trying to connect into, there's an OPC server that's sitting there we're trying to connect to, but we're not able to, we can read the data, but we can't subscribe to it. And, we're looking into, okay, what's happening here? Something is not allowing this or preventing this from occurring. So even sometimes when it's, hey, I even have an OPC endpoint, which is a very common endpoint for collecting data, it's not always easy to get that data out, and we have to explore it. Something that should be easy is not. But then there's often, more often the case of, there's just data that sits there that we can't access to. And this is, this is an ongoing challenge. And this is where we start talking with, especially companies we're working with, is that as you get new equipment, as you replace this equipment, make sure that you have access to the data that's coming out of there. So when we start looking at, even if it's just reliability data or, process data, technically speaking, one of the challenge continues to be that none of our equipment is connected, and we don't really have a way to get at that data, or the way we get at that data is going to require some work. It's got its own, data logger. Then I have to go in and consume that data log, and I have to buffer, and there's a lot of things that go into getting that data out. So I would say that's a technical challenge. I'll come back. Oftentimes, there's just it's the not invented here. It's the, we're not going to do that. Our IT group is already doing their thing, and we're running into, there's only so many dollars that are available. IT seems to generally have a very large budget, and they have a bigger sway within the organization. So I would say from that political standpoint, a lot of the challenges of digital transformation, it can be just sometimes it's the internal politics, or it's just the idea that we're not going to do that. There's other things and other strategies that we want to deploy. And I'm not saying that they're not wrong, but to me it comes back to, as a manufacturing, your manufacturing plant floor is your economic engine, and you should know what's going on there, 24/7, 365, and know that current state of what's going on down there. So I would say those are the two main
Yeah,
things that
I
I run
agree that
into.
database disconnected. I've seen databases on pieces of paper still when people walk around, all their maintenance systems, and we
Mhm.
get this question a lot around, can I take this data to my maintenance system? So I'm not doing services based on hours on monthly basis, but based on how much hours the item was running for, and not just that, but what
Mhm.
process was happening. So it's all these challenges that I see as well. Where, and Phil and I, we're having these discussions with customers, and we, like you, David, we've sort of come across similar challenges that you mentioned, and I like the way that you put forward definitely the idea of asset performance management. I like the way that you gave us the understanding of ISA 95, and it seems like you're a person who's always learning new things, which is great. Phil and I, we are continually on learning paths and learning journeys. We're always looking forward to the next thing to learn about, and we always asking our guests to come to the podcast, what's the next thing that you're looking to learn? What are you looking to learn more in? Where are you going?
So there's a couple of things that I'm currently doing right now. The first is Golang or Go. It's a programming language. I'm pretty proficient
Mm-hmm.
with using Python, but Go was developed by Google, so hence the Go or the Golang there. That it really, and there's a whole big article on it. And I'm not even going to try to destroy the history there. But if you just you just search for Golang or Go programming language, it'll give you that. But it was developed by Google because we needed a faster way to process things. So I'm learning it. It is it's another object-based, oriented programming language. So I'm learning that. That's the one that we use on the technical side. And like many things, it's a slow go because my main full-time job, of course, is going out and consulting and actually deploying a number of the systems that are out there, which that is the day job, and of course having a family. So from a technical standpoint, it's learning a new programming language. It's just Go to me is one of the latest ones out there. Of course there's Rust. There's a couple others that come to mind, but that's the one that's there. So take a look at Go and what it can do. It's wicked fast, wicked powerful, and the things you can do with that. um, I've mentioned a couple other times around a lot of digital transformation is
Mm.
change management. So I'm really sharpening the saw on a lot of the leadership books that are out there. So Patrick Lencioni is an author. I've read a number of his books. He has one that's called The Advantage. I would call that sort of that compendium of some of his other works that have come together all in one. So I would take a look at some of his writing out there because it really is all around. It's all around leadership. How do we get better? How do we manage change management within an organization? And a lot of it is just developing these strategies and working with companies to help them develop these strategies. And what does that language look like? How do I get better at communicating these types of things to help them do that? Because if I can show them the way of developing the strategy and then executing the strategy is clearly with all the things that's there. I would definitely take a look at just, like I said, leadership, change management. Those are two very good skill sets that you want to invest your time in. And it's more the soft skills, but just a lot of great stuff
Yeah,
out there.
absolutely. Like Industry 4 is all around the people, right? And communicating, you know, uh,
Hmm.
through the different stakeholders within the business. So those soft skills are definitely a high priority. It should be a high priority for
Yeah,
most
absolutely.
people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did the Gallup Strength Finder a few years ago, and it came out that I'm really good at execution and I'm really good at strategy. And it was like when I saw that, because in the other four categories there are influence and relationship building, and all of a sudden it was an aha moment of yeah, I agree those are the things that I'm good at. So my whole mission and my whole purpose is to help companies develop and execute strategies for their digital transformation, their asset performance management. And so, what are the things that I continue to learn is how do I get better at, the change management's a huge part of developing the strategy and executing the strategy because, as you mentioned, there's always the technical obstacles and we can generally overcome them. But how do we get the buy-in to where, start building on some successes and demonstrating those successes, but it's once you start that ball, rolling, or it's the proverbial snowball coming down the hill. Once you get it rolling, then that's where you can really start picking it up. But really, it's the fundamentals of getting the company to start doing things differently.
Awesome. Look, Dave, thanks. It's been fantastic having you on the show. Your insights into Industry 4 and digital transformation are incredibly valuable.
No, it's great,
Well, thank you
David.
for having me
Yeah,
on.
I'm going to have to rewatch this podcast. A lot of gold here that I really want to soak in. Yeah, thank you so
All right.
much for joining us, David. For those who want to follow you or find you, David, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can find me. It's just, David Schultz. I also have my
Yes.
podcast that's called Rise Up, and we spend actually a lot of time talking about ISA 95 and in event driven architectures and how we go about applying it. So, I would say those are the two spots. And of course, I work for Spruik Technologies, which we're the system integrator of Rise, which is a manufacturing data hub. But I think, amongst those three places,
Actually, I've
that's
watched
where
the
you'll
first
find
two
me.
episodes of Rise. It's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to the next. I think you got two more out, haven't you?
Oh, we just had
Yeah.
another one
Okay.
drop yesterday, which, since this is timely, it's
Good, good.
here the
I'll have
end of
to
June.
catch
Yeah.
up. Look, David, we really look forward to seeing your continued impact you do around industry, around manufacturing. We think it's quite valuable. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you for what you're doing. It's getting the message out there, and I appreciate you inviting me on. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And thanks to all our listeners out there. Don't forget to subscribe to the Unplugged and IoT podcast for more episodes on all your standard platforms. And we're really excited to see more industry leaders and innovators on the pod. Thanks for tuning in.